I'm going to introduce here Dean Peters. Dean, I'm excited for this one. I love the way you framed this, the dangerous animals of product management. And we've all been part of that for some time. So take it away. It's all yours, and I'll be the moderator. So, folks, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. You can hit me direct or hit everyone, and we'll go from there. Dean, take it away.
All righty. Thank you for that intro, Chris. I'm going to hit my timer here because I certainly want to leave time for your questions. And welcome to the Dangerous Animals of Product Management, where the subtitle is The Art of Managing Stakeholders While Staying True to Your Product Strategy. So let's move forward on the deck here. And please say thank you to our sponsors. Visit them. Okay. I'm going to be handing out this deck. So if you're trying to scribble and take screenshots, you don't need to, because A, this is being recorded, and B, I will share this deck. All righty. Just a quick introduction of, who this guy is in the safari hat. I am an experienced agile product manager and a recovering programmer. I've got about 30 years into this game, about 15 on each. Wrapping up at IQVIA just the other day, and I got a big new adventure happening on July 6th. So for those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, you'll get to see where my new place of employment is. I enjoy building great products, first by building great teams. Oh, and I forgot to add another bullet point there, and by having great conversations. I've done a lot of work over the past decade, and especially in the area of artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and in my spare time, I try not to crash my mountain bike here on the trails here in Apex, North Carolina, outside of Raleigh, while turning my entire backyard into a vegetable garden. And for me, I'm going to try this summer to get a podcast started. I think that'll be a lot of fun as well. But let's talk about what your needs are now. So on the menu today, of course, we introduced myself. We're going to talk about the Dangerous Animals 101, just introduce them very quickly here. We're going to talk about influence without authority, because I think that is a key point. There's some key facts I want to talk about that. And then we're going to get into a process that's sort of surrounding around some frameworks, 4 very simple to use frameworks to help the prioritization process. And in doing so, I think you'll have a way of having these guided conversations here. We'll put a little more light on this subject here. There we go. All righty. So let's keep moving on with the conversation. Thank you for letting me make that adjustment here. So who are these wild beasts who trample our backlog, our product vision, and our strategic roadmap? And this is where we welcome. And you've seen or heard of some of these, and some of you may not, and that's all right. Let's talk first about the Hippo. I think this one's been around for at least 20 years in various acts of writing. And we know it to be the highest paid person's opinion. And I'm not going to read each of these bullet points here. Like I said, we got to leave behind here, but I think we're familiar that it's usually the CEO or maybe the CPO or founders or other senior executives and VPs. And since they do have a lot of authority, there is the danger where they could push things down, and those things may not be validated. Those things may be sort of outcome-based, output-based rather than outcome-based. And even though their intentions are good, again, it creates a lot of context switching and some really good examples of some really bad outcomes. For example, Ron Johnson, who had helped set up the Genius stores for Apple. And before that, I believe he'd worked with e-commerce at someplace like Target. And of course, he came to JCPenney with a lot of cognitive bias based off of past experience here, and pushed ideas down on his teams, and JCPenney, well, they went into bankruptcy. So he took a somewhat almost profitable group here and just, drove it straight into the ground, even though he had a background of success. One you may not hear as much is the really high value new opportunity. That's the Rhino. These are people coming out of sales, out of marketing, sometimes the chief financial officer, all of them, again, good intentions, but they're optimizing on features because they feel that's the way they can drive revenue. And so if you've ever read like the first chapter of Melissa Perry's book, and she talks about this sales-driven type of product, or sales-driven type organization, this is definitely Rhino-driven. And what you see this happening is a lot of startups and that's fine to get the ball rolling. But where it doesn't play very well is when you try to expand into that growth stage and move forward to scale. And it's ironically enough, a company whose name is Scale Factor actually resorted to this to the point where scalability became so hard that they went ahead and were actually hired staff offshore. So as part of their product, as people were asking questions of the product and looking for reports, they actually had analysts instead of the algorithms answering the question. And of course, that doesn't scale. And even though they had 100 million in seed money, they ran out of runway and went broke. All righty, here's one that's always my favorite. Zero evidence, but really arrogant, the zebra. Okay, now you have these are sometimes the stakeholders who have a lot of domain experience, power players within the organization, sometimes deep pocketed or big enterprise type customers who are help keeping the business afloat. And while they bring their big egos or their big wallets and their domain expertise, they are also politically savvy, which means when you start pushing back, if you don't do it right, you can expect some upstream escalations. And this is where some of the motivations are a little bit suspect here. So you might have ignorance, you might have overconfidence, you certainly have a cognitive bias. The best example is I can think of is the Blockbuster CEO John Antioco, who, when Netflix was trying to sell Netflix to Blockbuster for just a few million, managed to laugh them out of the room out loud. And as we see, that really ended well for the people at Blockbuster. All right, moving forward. Works on latest fire. And this is less of a personality and more of a situation. And it involves DevOps, engineering, QA, and even us in product management. Meaning, while we have the ability to drive influence on the actual implementation here, because we're dealing with time commitments, because we're dealing with limitations, either in technical limitations or dealing with resource other limitations or people limitations, we tend to cheat. And it's almost like taking out a loan from a loan shark, which, okay, it may solve my problem right away, but at some point that mobster is going to show up in the middle of the night with a 2x4 looking at your kneecaps for payment. And it's interesting because I think the most salient example of technical debt was Knight Capital. Now, this organization had feature flags for trading features, and they had one. And normally, with you create technical debt when you have feature flags, and feature flags are good. I'm a big fan. However, they need to be managed. And after 9 years of code, one of these unmanaged feature flags was accidentally turned on at the cost of $460 million in 45 minutes. And finally, our favorite, the swoop and poop, that seagull manager. And I've found in the past, and I'll just give you an example here, it's usually that manager who's risen through the ranks, probably has a lot of technical expertise or other domain expertise. I experienced one with a senior VP of technology who rose through the ranks, starting with an intern as a programmer, and after 15 years was the senior VP. And more than once, he came to my teams with, "Hey, I spent the weekend writing this code. Can you put it in your the system here you're working on?" And I understand his intentions were good. I understand he thinks he was helping because of his technical knowledge, but because of his impatience, I was trying to explain to him that this creates some context switching for the engineers, gets them out of their flow. And it also creates what I call an unscalable situation of bolt-on software, which I refer to as Frankensoft. And there's just so many examples of this. So you just need to go to about every third Dilbert cartoon or every fifth Mark Cartoonist cartoon, and you'll see the type of disruption that this can create. Okay, so we've gone through who the players are. Let's talk about how do we approach these beasts. And I want to just sort of dive into influence without authority, because we hear that term thrown out. And we've also heard it phrased or couched differently. We may call it soft skills or diplomacy. And I just want to talk about it in terms of just some practical, tactical, because I agree with that. And I agree that you need to start with empathy. So you need to understand their perspective, and you're saying of whom, and so that's just it. Who's the perspective of the end user? I prefer to start with the end user and work my way in. I just really don't like these situations where we're working on one side and trying to work out. So you have that, and then you have the perspective of perhaps who the hippo is. You need to understand what their situation might be, or the rhino. Again, some of these people have good intentions, just not so great execution here. So let's align their motivations with our product goals. Let's go ahead and work with the hippos and the rhinos and the seagull managers who are inflict this on us. Then we want to embrace transparency. I think part of the deal here is trust. So we don't want to just surface the what, but the why. And I think that's really important that we do that, because when we provide the transparency of the trade offs, for example, the opportunity cost or the cost between going one direction or another, or the decisions we make, or the customer insights we've been managed to collect, or even the, that, and along with that quantitative data, that qualitative data, maybe the quantitative data we collect through analytics or data mining and more. We don't hurt ourselves by making that all very transparent and being willing to discuss it. But just remember, when you put it out there, be willing to discuss it. And what this does is it gives context to the conversation. I mean, we want data informed decisions and ideas. I try to avoid data driven decisions here, because I think quantitative data without qualitative data really gets us into a pickle here. And so they need to be balanced. And this works across the different wild animals in their prioritization. So just keep that in mind and keep things transparent. We want to empower the stakeholders with technical know-how. Now, before we go to detail, let me put some guardrails on this. We want to demonstrate really what we're after is, hey, this technical debt or these technical hurdles, and technical debt can manifest its way in many forms. It impedes our ability to scale and grow, which ultimately impedes our ability to bring a revenue. Now, you don't have to get into the weeds, of the geeky detail. What you do need to do is paint that picture through real world example, what's gone wrong in the past for others or ourselves, and what could potentially happen for us. You could be in a situation where you hear back from DevOps that we possibly painted ourselves into a corner, or that we've done so much feature that now the product is just sort of barely holding on. And this really helps with the conversations with avoid the working on latest fire, but also sort of holding back a bit that charging Rhino or Hippo. We want to engage in tiny acts of discovery, or TADs, as I like to call them here. And this is a phrase that I sort of rolled out, an idea I've been sort of pulling a thread on since about pandemonium in 2019. And it's trying to give those data informed decisions some challenges to the assumptions that they're built on here. And when I say tiny acts of discovery, I really mean that. A paper prototype, simple data mining, an online survey, something that's very low res, something that's incredibly fast, something that's inexpensive. I've worked in some situations. In fact, I was with a really talented a UX person who we were able to get out just online a survey of just 4 screenshots, 4 different mock-ups of the same screen. And it was very simple. Which one do you feel gets you to X? And that was it. It was very highly focused. It was very simple. And the users were able to respond. We sent it out to about 30 people. We got about 24 respondents within the same night. It just did it the same day, got it out the same night. It was interesting because the system that we were using to do that, and I'd have to go ask them about the name of it because it gets away from me, but there's several that can do this. We found that of the 24, 20 of them responded in under 60 seconds. Now, I think that's a strong enough signal to say, we might have something here, okay? There are other types of tests that can save you a lot of pain and money. And I think one of the things we want to remember is we can use these tests such as canary test, painted door features, similar experiments in a tiny of a segment. So if you've got good feature flagging, this is one of the reasons why products like Split or Launch Darkly are so effective, because they allow you to do this very targeted. So for example, if I just wanted to target just a few users in the APAC region in the middle of the night. So if I have a new release, I can put this out there in a canary release. And so I'm now looking at maybe 5% of my user base. It's off hours because it's aimed at a particular segment of the globe and servers there. I can quickly see that maybe, wow, this messaging system, it creates a great user interface, but we didn't realize it's going to have this impact on the back end. Now you can just turn the feature flag off. Usually that 5% is not online, and if they are, you can reach out to them directly. And the rest of the user base is spared you trying to roll out a much larger rollout that's going to impact everyone. And then, of course, your customer support loves you because they're not getting hammered because you put out a release to 100% of the population in all your server farms and just managed to just blow up everything horribly. And again, it's about controlling the blast radius, limiting the experience, to small, I should say tiny user or server segments here, but tiny acts of discovery works across all the players here. All right. So just keep that in mind. And then we want to train them to be like product managers, the stakeholder. Now, keep in mind, we're not asking them to do our job, but I get back to this again. Paint a vivid picture of the end user. When? Every chance you have. Start out and paint. It could be a sprint demo. It could be a retrospective. It could be a vision and strategy meeting. It could be a business case meeting. It could be a meeting with the board. Start by painting a vivid picture, not of the buyer, not of the stakeholder, but of the end user. Because in this way, we set ourselves in a position where we can use some of these frameworks, and we're going to talk about in the next couple minutes, and we can use those then to evaluate these new ideas and sort of flesh them out. It also helps with the validation. And it means then that you can engage these dangerous animals, these exercises, and you can be ready to surface things like the opportunity, the monetary costs behind these. Really, this is helpful for the rhinos and the zebras and the seagull managers. I should probably put the hippo as well. Okay. Most of all, let's connect the proof with the purpose here. Let's take the emotion and the ego out of the product decisions here. Let's take the cognitive bias off the table here. Again, this is why we always want to keep the company and that product vision and strategy out in the forefront. It starts with the user and you work your way in. We want to present quantitative data for sure, but within it, in the context of qualitative feedback and vice versa. I think all too often I've got all these analytics, but they don't resonate because you really can't pair things up. The other and going the other way, I got an NPS score. Yeah, but what does the data say? I like using what they call early adopter programs. This is where I have a very small segment testing a very small set of features that before we bring it out to the larger user base here. And it's usually with just one or two clients. Again, this is what a good feature flagging system will afford you. And in doing so, they tell me what they want in weekly touch-based meetings. But I've also got things instrumented with analytics, whether it's Amplitude or Pendo or some other system here, because I've also found that what perhaps the leader in the room, the buyer, their manager tells me doesn't necessarily reflect what their actual staff, their actual end users are doing with the software. So it's always good to have that balance of the two. And again, present your arguments that support the outcomes for the end user over the outputs. Get out of the being in the feature factory. Again, this helps you with your hippos and your rhinos and your zebra conversations here. All right. So we've got about 5 more minutes to go here. Let me see if I can get through there because, hey, you said you had a process for walking through frameworks, and we certainly do here. And I want to talk about 4 of them very quickly here. All righty. So first one is story mapping. And I won't go into this because I think we've heard a lot of this, but we'll look at this. Identify the persona, their pain points and desired outcome here. What you're trying to do is capture their end-to-end journey from the beginning of seeking an outcome to the end, how they go from point A to point Z, and all the E and the F and the M and O in between here. And you do that, you can then create hypotheses for the outcomes. You can then prioritize these. You can then start finding your tiny acts of discovery to validate each of those very quick, tests here. And once they're submitted, you get that list because now you have an idea of outcomes you're after and you have some ideas for solutions. And that takes you to Cynefin, which I've misspelled. I put an extra I in there. My apologies. And with Cynefin, it helps you collaborate through by problem ideas, sort of to see what are clear. In other words, what's the most simple? The no-brainers, the low-hanging fruit. All right, we certainly want that. And if you'll notice in the diagram here, we're always trying to take everything that's in that goes, with if clear is the best, we want to take what's good and try moving it into the best. We want to take what's what would you call it, complex, and move it into complicated, move it into clear, and so forth, and move in that clockwise fashion towards the best practice. And that means you try to get complicated to move it into clear. It's doable, but there are a few unknown unknowns. Again, that may be where some experiments are required to sort of unpack those. And it may be further sessions of just sort of refining and atomizing. Complex. We know what it is, but there's unknown unknowns. We want to go through the act of unpacking it. This will probably take more experimentation, more research, and in doing so, you take that from complex into complicated. And if you're really doing a good job with it, or if you're really starting things are clearing up, you can get complicated into clear. There's chaotic. There's something out there, but the cause and effect still aren't known. Usually is a bit more observation. It's just sort of like, okay, we're just going to keep an eye on this now. We're not so sure yet. And then, but it's worth trying to get that, atomized enough so you can sort of get the cards out on the table and have that conversation that gets you to from chaotic to complex. And then you have the disorderly, and it's just a crap show. And you do not want to touch that. That's your third rail. Let it burn. And you just let it burn because that usually derails teams. So again, it's one of those things where you just got to sort of like say no, we can't prioritize to that. Now here's my favorite, because once you've gotten to that point here, and I've used this, I remember inheriting a 6,000 story Jira story backlog that had been used as a black hole over several years. And they said, we're going from on-prem to SaaS, Dean. So we need to sort of, get control of this. And so, it was getting around Christmas and Thanksgiving and Christmas. So usually the night before Thanksgiving and then Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, there were some horrible accidents. And what happened, tickets that were over a year old managed to get put on a won't do status with a note saying, look, if you really want to do this thing, let's get customer feedback and we'll turn this back on. I think out of, I think it was close to 5,000 stories closed, 2 came back. 2. All righty. And again, it's a simple scoring system we have here. And Steve, you're the author of this. So, if I get this wrong, feel free to jump in. But I like this because you have this nice little Fibonacci score here, 1, 2, 3, 5. And we get to look at the problem through its impact. How does this issue affect the customer here? And we score that. So on this line here, each row would be a feature 1, feature 2, feature 3. And looking at this gray bar, we're looking at feature 3. What would the impact be? And then we're going to multiply that against dissatisfaction. Is this a big deal or a minor annoyance? Because if it's a big deal, it's probably a big deal. Evidence. Do we have that qualitative and or quantitative data to support this? Because, if it's low, it should be a low multiplier here. And I think this is where the idea of you have those multipliers, it really helps come into a play here. To what advantage is it to the business? Yes, we need to build delightful software. Whoops. Okay. That's telling me I need to start wrapping up here. We need to build delightful software that's hard for our competitors to copy, but also improves our margins here. And then we divide that by the level of effort. And this is where you have to have talk with development and DevOps, where we divide it up. Because as we bring these scores together here, now this gives us an idea. In fact, I was able to wire this into Jira during that situation I was telling you that we were dealing with here. And I'd meet twice a week with the product managers and the product owners, and we went through the scoring. And after about 2-3 months of the remaining 1,000 tickets here, we were able to find 100 out of that 1,000 of the top ideas. And from that, we identified about 25 of the most valuable ideas. And we took those ideas and walked into a process called buy a feature. Now, this is where we go ahead and we enumerate those 25 out of the, like I said, that we had, that were the highest value. We assigned each a different dollar prices based off of what that value was from the idea method. We went ahead and got our stakeholders together. We actually got them together with a couple customers. That's your option. We gave each participant not, out of 25, some amount, I believe was $1,000 here. Well, we only gave them $250 each. Okay. And we did that by design because you can't have everything you want. We had them buy things. We said, look, microphones are open, negotiate. So we had a situation. Well, if I do this, will you do that? Yeah. I mean, haggling, trying to convince others. And you give this time as they get the scoring in and they're done, then you sum up the purchases, you do a review of it, and you go ahead and encourage participants to discuss their purchases here. And I think that brings to light the prioritization. And now out of that 25, we may have those 5 that we can do in Q3. Those 3, and it may not be the top one. It may we can't do the top one. There's too much lift there. But the next 2, and then the 4th, and then the 6th one, yeah, we can get that all done in the 3rd quarter here. Let's go for that. So again, now you've taken these 4 frameworks and you strung them along to do your validation, to do your priorities, your experiments. You've gone ahead and gone through and scored them here. You've gotten them out in front of the stakeholders. You've made it transparent here, and you've positioned yourself not to have arguments on emotion, but these data-informed, highly transparent, highly engaged conversations that help you get from point A to point B. So, thing is, collaborate. And then through their shared understanding, whether it doesn't matter which frame you use. There's a site called Folding Tacos that has 24 of these frameworks that you can try to use. The framework is not so much important. Come up with your own if you want, but remove the emotion through experimentation and validation. Continually show empathy. Be respectful of the sense of agency of others. I cannot express to you when you're dealing with the hippos, the rhinos, and even the zebras. Try to make sure that even though you have to say no and say no a lot, never take away their sense of agency, or they will escalate or work against you here. So just be aware of that. And remember, you don't want the dangerous animals to be more powerful than your customers. Start with the end user, end with the end user, start with the outcome they're seeking, end with the outcome that you're going to provide them. And I think with that, we are ready to go ahead and have questions and answers. I'm going to leave this up for a couple minutes, and then I'm going to switch over to the browser. Chris, I think we've given ourselves good time for some questions and answers.
Sure have. Dean, what a wonderful presentation. I loved the tips, the exercises, and the use of the jungle animals. Really creative. Some questions have come in. One that actually was on the top of mine as well, and I'll just read it to you. Thoughts on ways to tame the rhinos and hippos who believe that they are, in fact, the Steve Jobs, and say that there is no evidence because customers don't yet really know what they need.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I've read that before. In fact, in studying this, there is that person. Well, what about the Steve Jobs here? And well, the Steve Jobs are rare. They are very rare. In fact, I'd mentioned Melissa Perry, who even mentions that in her book, avoiding the bill trap here. And by the way, if you go to my blog, I list the various books I've used to support this here. I've actually got a blog post I did in 2018, which actually talks about the resources and includes some of those. And they're rare, though. I mean, yes, that person may believe it. That's, I think, because that person may be sort of zebra-ish, that again, we need to make sure that we come equipped with the quantitative and qualitative data. Because if we don't speak to truth to data here, all it is going to be whoever can politically maneuver better, or whoever has the loudest voice, whoever's the most extroverted, and we really don't need that to happen. So again, and that's why some of these frameworks, and then usually stringing them together, and these tiny acts of discovery are so powerful in helping diffuse some of that.